Hello, this is Marion here, and what I'd like to do in this short presentation is take you through some basic principles of survey research design. Now, this particular presentation or lecture is a lecture which I delivered to the Advanced Research Design module last semester. So most of the slides in the presentation are to help people design their own surveys, but there is a benefit of sharing this presentation with you, because in sharing the presentation with you I will explain some important concepts of survey research design, because if the quantitative study that you've chosen to critically appraise is a survey, then it's very important that you understand these principles before you can critically appraise the study effectively. So these were the learning outcomes of that particular session. I think what's really important for evidence-based practice students is to articulate the basic concepts of quantitative research, and all of Unit 3 is actually, or most of Unit 3 is designed to help you focus on the basic concepts of quantitative research, because you have to understand them before you can weigh up whether it's any good or not. And really important, make a differentiation between research which is non-experimental and experimental. And we'll talk a little bit about variables, and we won't talk too much about research questions, because the emphasis in a lecture like this on the Advanced Research Design module is for students who will be designing their own studies and may well be thinking about a survey as their research design, which obviously you won't be doing that in the evidence-based practice module. But we will talk about what is quite important is to think about limitations and application of survey research methods. Now, all of you must be familiar with a survey. You must have all participated in a survey at some time, and you're a student at Oxford Brookes University, and at the end of every module you're given an evaluation form to fill out, and that's usually in the form of a survey. So I think we're all familiar with how surveys are used, but there are some concepts which are possibly poorly understood about surveys. Okay, now this is really important. There are two types of research question that can be asked. There are exploratory questions, which asks what is going on, and explanatory questions which ask why is it going on. Now, in areas of where little is known about a particular phenomenon, then the what is going on questions tend to be asked. They're descriptive questions. So, for example, in Unit 2 you looked at qualitative research, and qualitative research is exploratory. It asks what is going on questions. And in Unit 3 you're looking at quantitative research, and quantitative research in the main asks why is it going on questions. They're explanatory and they're analytical. Now, surveys are in fact descriptive and exploratory, and I think this is possibly where students sometimes get confused about surveys and consider them to be qualitative, which is understandable because they tend to be asking similar types of questions. Now, the question that a researcher asks will determine the type of data which the research collects. Now, in Unit 3, the focus is on quantitative research, and the purpose of quantitative research is to make predictions. Obviously, that's really important when it comes to treatments and diseases. Want to know what treatments work, want to know what's going to happen to people with X condition over time. seeks is causality, wants to know why something is going on, builds on previous evidence and tests theory. So very often in a quantitative study, the researchers will have a hypothesis. They'll have something that they want to prove or disprove. What's really important about quantitative data collection and analysis, it's based on statistical calculations, because it's really important that the researcher can make predictions about what might happen to similar populations or what might happen in the future. So unless the statistics are robust, the researcher's not going to be able to do that. And the sort of quantitative data which is collected is frequencies, measures, and proportions. Now this is pretty basic stuff about statistics, and it's not the most important concept to understand, but I'll just go through it anyway. But measurement, all measurements fall into 4 categories. They're nominal. So a nominal measurement means there's a difference between 2 groups or 2 individuals. So an example of that would be that male versus female. An ordinal means that there's differences between numbers. So 2 is bigger than 1, 3 is bigger than 2, 4 is bigger than 1. An interval survey, an interval measure is that something might be twice as big as another number, or 3 times as big as a number, or a 4 times as big as a number. Or a ratio measurement measures the differences or the proportions or the fractions. Variables are really, really important concept of quantitative research to understand. They're the building blocks of quantitative research. So in Unit 1, you all developed PICO questions, and in your PICO questions, you are actually identifying variables. Okay, a variable is whatever is measured and recorded, and a variable has 2 or more distinct values. So let's have a look at some examples. Okay, so a variable can have an effect on another variable. Okay, that your job, your occupation is a variable, and a variable that might have an effect on that is stress. Variables can be associated with each other, smoking and heart disease, or there may be a difference in variables between groups. For example, in a randomized control trial, you might see the outcomes from treatment group A are different compared to treatment group B. Now, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, it's really important to understand the differences between non-experimental and experimental research. At this stage, you've all should have by now selected a quantitative study that you're going to critically appraise for this unit. You may change your mind, of course, that's absolutely fine. That's all about the learning process. If you've chosen a randomized controlled trial, a cohort study, or a treatment study, or a systematic review, or a meta-analysis, then what you're looking at is experimental research. So what that actually means in experimental research, what the researchers are doing, they're trying to manipulate variables. Now, if you think about a randomized controlled trial, it's meant to be the gold standard. A basic randomized controlled trial would have 2 groups of participants, and what the researchers have to do is that they have to prove that at the beginning of the trial that the two groups of participants shared exactly the same characteristics. So in doing that, they're manipulating variables. Now, that's very different to survey research. because rather than manipulating variables, non-experimental research attempts to determine the relationship between variables. So we could ask a sample of students on the evidence-based practice course what their attitudes were to evidence-based practice as a topic for a module. We wouldn't be trying to manipulate anything, but that would be very different from carrying out an experiment on evidence-based practice students. For example, we could deliver the module in the classroom, and we could deliver it online like we are here, and we could compare the difference between the groups. But in order to make that meaningful, the groups of students would have to share the same characteristics. So if two variables are linked but not in a causal manner, they are correlated. For example, somebody's age and the use of social media. So age isn't the cause of using social media, but the two variables, perhaps being a younger age, being an adolescent or a young adult, you're more likely, maybe, to use social media. So their variables are linked, but age isn't the cause, because obviously we know that older people probably use social media as well. So what a survey actually design does, it provides a quantitative or numeric description of trends, attitudes or opinions of a population by studying a sample of that population, and from that sample the researcher generalises or draws inferences. So it's trying to describe what is going on, not why is it going on, but what is going on in a particular sample, and it's using numbers, it's quantitative, it's asking enough people so that to prove that whatever that trend is significant. So it's different to qualitative research where numbers are not used at all. So the aim of a survey is to describe the characteristics of a population. So if I'm going to do a survey on the evidence-based practice module students, then or we're going to look at the module evaluation, it's probably pretty meaningless without describing some of the characteristics of the students who take the evidence-based practice module. Longitudinal surveys, they correlate research with repeated observation of the same items over time. So it's doing a survey but over a longer period of time. A cross-sectional survey is an observation of a subset of a population at the same time, and those are the most common surveys. For example, census is a very common population survey which is carried out longitudinally. So I can't remember, is it every 7 years we have to participate in a census? So that would be an example of a longitudinal survey, whereas your module evaluation is a cross-sectional survey. So we're just all the university wants to know is what the students think, or what their experiences were, or what their attitudes were to a particular module at a particular time. And data is collected from participants using a survey instrument. It's actually really difficult to design a survey. So if any of you are planning it for the future, then I recommend that you look at some already validated tools. So you have to use the same instrument for every participant. It should be delivered in a standard format, and it gives participants, provides answers, opinions, perceptions or attitudes on a topic or an issue. It can be delivered postally, it can be delivered online, and it can be delivered face to face. Now, one of the main strengths of a survey is that it's familiar and simple. Like I said at the beginning, we've all participated in surveys. Anybody that lives their life online, like most of us, you must do. You're doing an online module. I'm an online teacher. You're exposed to participate in loads of surveys at any different time. You can collect quite a lot of data quite quickly. Doesn't cost very much, particularly online surveys. Something like a SurveyMonkey account is actually free. There's low intrusion for the participants. You can have anonymised responses, and to a certain extent there can be less researcher bias. Now, for example, I teach the Advanced Research Design module, and I know some of you are doing that at the moment, and we talk a lot in that module about carrying out research on patients or people that you work with. So for some people, doing that kind of module, or well, you'll all do that sort of module, but if you plan that sort of study in the future, it would give you maybe access to a different population where you didn't have that relationship. The weakness is it's a fixed format, so you can only, I mean, I think you've probably all had that experience where you've undertaken a survey, but perhaps you haven't really had an opportunity to say what you really think about something. You haven't really been able to express your opinion properly because you haven't been asked the questions in the right format. There are limited response options, and their lack of depth. So you might, there are options on surveys to ask qualitative or open-ended questions, but they tend to have a lack of depth. So if you compare that to undertaking a qualitative, if you've undertaken a qualitative interview with a participant and they gave a response to the question, you could ask them to provide more information. Surveys have frequent low response rates. So you're doing well if you get a 30% response rate. So people who are designing surveys have to think quite a lot about how significant the response rate is going to be. Sampling is quite important when it comes to any kind of research, actually, irrespective of the design. The sample is the group of participants selected for your research study, because you can't include everyone that might be eligible to participate in a study. Identification of a sample is more feasible if the research question is specific. So there's just two examples here which you can reflect on in your own time. Which of these are the most specific? The motivations of learners on postgraduate courses, or the motivation of learners on a postgraduate research module in health and social care. So I don't know whether you can see the difference between those two questions, but the second one would probably guide your survey questions a little bit more considerably than the first one. And with any quantitative research design, what the researchers have to do, they need to estimate how large a sample of participants they need to include in order for the results to reach statistical significance. So that's really important as the critical appraiser of research. So when it comes to your quantitative studies, you should be able to find that in the research report. And important concepts, reliability. A similar result is obtained in response to a particular question on repeated occasions. So those repeated occasions would be the larger the sample that you've got that responds to the survey. And one of the things about survey design, which is a bit tedious when you undertake a survey, I'm sure you've all had the experience, you answer a question and you seem to be answering the same question 2 or 3 questions later. Well, that's a particular method just to make sure that participants are giving the same type of answers to the same type of question if it's phrased slightly different. Real difference needs to be accurately reflected, and it's obviously very challenging where human behaviour is concerned. If you think about it, if you're given your module evaluation on a day when you're tired, you're stressed, etc., the way in which you're going to respond to those questions might be a lot different from on a day when you're completely relaxed and you're not particularly worried about something. And this is really important. Validity is a really important concept when it comes to surveys, the extent to which a specific instrument measures what it's supposed to measure. So if we just think of a very common concept or common phenomena that we come across in healthcare is pain. If you think of a visual analog score, that's an example of a specific instrument which measures what it's supposed to measure. So similarly, a survey instrument should measure what it's supposed to measure. So it should measure the attitudes or the beliefs or the concerns of a particular population. So the data needs to be precise, it needs to be detailed, it needs to be accurate, it needs to have construct validity, conclusion validity, and external validity. And external validity means if you ask the same questions to a similar population that you would get the same answers. This is about designing a survey, which isn't that important from the critical appraisal point of view, but it's always really important with any study that you're looking at, irrespective of the research design, is are they asking a clear question? And questionnaires have to be designed very, very carefully for surveys. You would expect any survey research to be drawing from existing literature. Although it's exploratory, it's not exploratory in the way that qualitative research. The questions need to be numbered, they need to be delivered in the same order. The researchers have to code them, they need to give a unique identifier to each questions, and there's different type of question types that you can have in a survey. You can have multiple choice, you can have multi-response, so you can give more than one answer to a question. And the Likert type scale, we'll look at a Likert type scale, or visual analog scores, where I mentioned that earlier in relationship to pain. So here we go. These examples of the surveys when you want to measure the quantitatively where participants' thoughts, feelings or attitudes lie in relation to an issue. So you could rate this presentation from boring to interesting, or a Likert scale would be that you strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. So the researcher would count up how many people were in each category, and a visual analog score is rating something from 1 to 10. So as we said earlier, the simplest one to think about within healthcare is rating pain on a scale of 1 to 10. And that's just another example of a Likert type scale. I hope this presentation has given you a flavour of the difference between surveys which are non-experimental and the experimental quantitative designs, which some of you will be looking at. In Unit 3, we've got quite a large section on statistics, so whatever quantitative research design that you will be critically appraising within this unit, it's really, really important to understand some basic concepts about statistics. Not covered in this presentation, but covered in the Unit 3 material. Thank you for listening.